Hey everyone, Lee Archinal here from Cyborg Security, and thank you for joining us again for another 30-minute threat hunt. This time, we're going to focus on hunting for toolkits. Now, a toolkit kind of separates itself from malware, as in malware is just the program itself, and it's designed to do one thing, while the toolkit is a collection of different modules or functions. Basically, it's not just a hammer, it's your entire toolbox. I'm going to demonstrate how we can work through the process of deciding which toolkit to look for, and then we're going to actually go for a hunt. Let's go. So before we begin the threat hunt, you might be asking yourself, well, which toolkit should I worry about? And while there are plenty of them out there, there are a couple that stand out because of their ease of access and ease of use. And most of the time, you'll find that toolkits that are open source are the ones that are abused the most, just because they are open source and anyone can download it. These include, but aren't limited to, like Cobalt Strike. That is a big threat emulation framework. You got Metasploit, which is another threat emulation framework. You have Sliver, Brute Ratel. So a couple of these out there. Some you have to pay a license to use. But the idea is that these are a framework that consists of many different functions and modules that you can use to exploit and post-exploitation in those stages so that you can further compromise the victim and achieve your goals as a threat actor. Now, the one we're going to focus on today is actually Meterpreter, which is also known as Metasploit, but is not the same thing, but we'll get into it. So, how does the threat hunting platform or Cyborg's hunter platform work into this? Well, we have these filters on the side, which are nice. And you can come down here, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at threat names. And we're just going to scroll through, and as you can see, we have the threat names that we actually cover and how many packages or hunt packages are available. Now we're going to come down all the way to Interpreter. We're going to see what we get. Now, if you're still not sure what Meterpreter is and you don't want to go and research it, we've actually included a threat profile here as well. So it gives you an idea of what it is. It says Meterpreter is an attack payload used in the Metasploit attack framework. Metasploit is an attack toolset used to aid in penetration testing and IDS signature development. So this is the kind of activity that a threat actor would exhibit while using Meterpreter. So we're going to come back, we're going to uncheck the threat profiles, we're going to check the hunt packages. We want to see what's going on. And the first one we see is potential Meterpreter default service name created. So let's take a look at what a hunt package consists of and what information we can pull from it to help us or aid us in our threat hunt. So we're going to jump right in. First, we see the tools that we support for this query. Now, as you can see, we have the drop-down which provides the query itself. You can just copy it and jump straight to Splunk and copy and paste, and it should run the query that you see right here. And if there's activity, you should be able to see it. Now, we also provide descriptions. We provide contextual information such as tagging, emulation, and validation. So if you do want to take a script and run it, it will actually, if you download the validation package, what you do is you detonate that or run it in your environment. Hopefully, and I'm saying this, please, 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 in a lab environment, not production. But what you can do is run this package and it will generate the logs needed to validate the query above. We also have the query logic table. So if you're not using one of the tools that are listed above, or just want to get a better understanding from a human readable table or format, you can come to the query logic table. It provides the field and value relationship where you see event ID is 7045. So we're looking for a specific Windows event ID. We see that the service name is a mixture of uppercase and lowercase letters. So that A through Z, the lowercase is saying any letter A through Z in the lowercase, any capital A through Z, any combination of that is 10 to 16 characters long. And the service file name is dropped in a temp directory. So all these conditions need to be met to be considered the default service name from interpreter. Then we have a research which provides you more information about what's going on, what is interpreter, and then as you scroll down, we have the MITRE attack information. So we try to map to MITRE as much as possible, simply because it gives you a better idea of where they're at in the attack, and possibly which stage. But it's really good information there as well. Then we got the response action. So this is the steps of, here's how you detect or determine if it is a true positive. The mitigation recommendations kind of breadcrumbs you through the investigation as a threat hunter. But enough of that. We're going to jump into the hunt itself. So we're going to come up here, we're going to hit copy paste, and we're going to jump into Splunk. So we're using Splunk again, simply because it provides me the ability to display the information neatly on the screen for everyone to see, and it actually helps me pick out the artifacts that I want to pivot on as we move through the investigation. Now, other SIEMs are great as well because they have great functionalities. I just choose to use Splunk in these demonstrations because, once again, of the aggregation and tabling data. So what we have here is we have the query. So we're looking at the index being endpoint, which is Windows event logs, as you can see by the source type. Event code 7045 again, and then service file name contains temp, and that's what those asterisks mean. They're the wildcards. Now, if you come down here, it says regex, which is a transform command in Splunk, service name. So it's looking at the service name, and it's only showing me results that match this regular expression. So not to be confused with rex, which is another transform command in Splunk. Regex only shows me the results that match this regular expression. Now, the next transform command we use is stats, and that's the command we use to actually build the table that we're seeing right here. So we're sorting by computer name and the user. So we see down here that computer name is desktop2bb, user was not translated, and then we see the service name, which is a random mush of letters, both letter or uppercase and lowercase, which validates this part of the regular expression. Now, if we count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, we see that the 14 characters fall within the 10 to 16 character range. So we have basically validated that query and made sure that the conditions are met. From here, the job's not done. We have to move on with the investigation because as a threat hunter, our job is to paint the bigger picture and tell a story, not just report facts. Now, reporting facts is part of the job, but we have to be able to say, here's why these events are connected. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pivot off an artifact that I found in the data. And that artifact is this executable name, which did fall in the temp directory, so the C Windows temp directory, and it's also randomly named. So we're just going to create a pivot query, or I would like to call it a pivot query, but we're recreating a query based off of this executable name. And that's going to look like this. So all we did is we expanded the indexes that we're looking for. So we're looking at endpoint data, and we're also looking at sysmon, which is pretty much endpoint detection or like EDR logging for Windows that's not native. You had to install it later on. If you're interested, we have some videos on TikTok on how to install sysmon, but it gives you a lot of more granular details about what's happening on your endpoint. So we're looking at endpoint or sysmon. Now, we are using, or we're focusing on the desktop 2BB, but we're using different fields because endpoint, the index endpoint captures the host name under computer name, while sysmon only captures it under computer. So we have to make sure that while we're expanding our indexes, we're also expanding the fields that we're searching on. And we use this term as the, or the wildcard, which is the first part of the executable. The reason I left off the .exe was to see if there's anything that is related outside of this activity here. So it's kind of just generalizing the information that we have and the artifacts that we found, and I am expanding the net to capture almost anything that's related, or that's the hope. Also, all we're doing is we're taking that same stats command and we're sorting by event code, and I want to see the count of the events or the different types of events. So we have a couple results here. We see there's a lot of 4103s, which I believe is script block logging. So that's going to be noisy in general. So we can actually jump over here to the events tab and we can check that out. So as we scroll down, we could possibly find, so process ID or event code. There we go. 51. Man, for being as noisy as it is, we can't see it. We have 4688, that's process create. 4656, that's access to an object was requested. We have more, we have 5156, more 5156. Man, it'd be easier just to filter on it. 4688, 4103, here we go, boom. All right, so we're gonna check the message. Check the source too. So it is Windows, Microsoft Windows PowerShell operational log source. And if we take a look at the message, it's saying command invocation, get item, and then we see that the value is the randomly named executable that we found. This is how it fits, or that event code fits into the story and why we're seeing it. So we can come to this events tab. We can find further information than just the table that we built. But once you build the table and you find the events, then you can start making a better table per event code so that you can see the values that you want. And I'll demonstrate that shortly. But from here, the event code that sticks out to me is 13. I know it only happened once, but this is a sysmon event code for registry key modification. And that always concerns me because the registry is, it's designed to store information of the configuration of the Windows machine that you're using. So if you're messing with the configuration keys, then you're possibly, or a threat actor is possibly making your machine more vulnerable, while a legitimate network or domain admin will create a group policy that hardens your machine. So if you ever see if you see your domain admin modifying registry keys, that's probably for the best. But if you see suspicious activity like this, modifying registry keys is probably not a good thing. But we're going to pivot off this. We're still using the same term. We've added event code equals 13. And because we're only looking at the index sysmon, we've removed unnecessary fields that just might make the search take a little longer. We also added event code 13 specific fields down here, which is target object, which I define as the registry path. The details field, which is the registry data by the image. So what we've determined now is that not only was the service created, or actually we're kind of validating it twice. We saw that the service was actually created. Here we see the registry key that contains the services being populated and modified. So that's a double verification to say, hey, we saw this activity, we have the registry key to guarantee it, this is the real deal. So where do we pivot from here? Well, we're going to actually go back one step, and we're going to go back to our other query that we used. Now, this is a method that I like to use where you start with your first pivot query to get some results, especially with, especially with if you're finding more information like the event code search that we did, which is currently on the screen. But the idea is that you go down one path. So we followed the event code 13. It didn't take us very far, but the information that we gathered from it was still important because we validated that it actually modified and not stuck, or stuck to the configuration. Now I want to take another look at another event code, which is event code 11. Now this is a sysmon event code that is, or it's related to files being created. So as you can see, added target file name field, and then by image. So I want to see what image exists or what image created the file. Now, if we take a look at it, we see that notepad.exe, which is a legitimate text editor, created this file. And that seems pretty suspicious in my mind, because why is Notepad doing any of that? You know, that doesn't make sense. I use Notepad to jot down notes for what it's called. I don't know how many times someone will actually create an executable using Notepad. And that kind of screams process injection to me. But either way, we have to continue this investigation. We're still not done. So real quick, so far we found the service name or the service that was created from the event code 7045. We found the registry key being modified, which was the services registry key. And now we found a file being created by notepad.exe. So we've kind of traversed 3 different event codes, and it's taking us all into different directions. My best advice to you threat hunters that are out there, or even the seasoned threat hunters, you probably know this already, go first with the way you're more comfortable. Because then you can find the more details out, you're experienced, you know where you want to go with it, you know how you want to pivot on a certain event type, then save those other ones for later on, so that, you know, once you get all the information out from that first, let's say a process create, then you can take a couple steps back and take your time and work through the other event types. All right, so now that spiel's over. The next thing we want to do is, I see an executable and I want to follow it. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use the randomly named executable that we have here on the screen. And we're going to focus on sysmon again, but we're going to use a different method than we did in the last episode. And if you saw that one, the threat hunting for APTs, we actually focused on the name of the executable. This time, we're going to leverage the process IDs and the parent process IDs that we find along the way. And the idea is that process IDs are unique enough to a session or an event that you can, if you take a process ID and say within, you know, I'm looking for this, I want to see events related to this, you'll see all the events that are related to it. Now, the downside is if you search over too long of a time, you may get a lot of false positives because these process IDs are reused. But let's get this going. So once again, index sysmon, computer desktop 2BB. Event code 1 is process create for sysmon. And I said parent image is the randomly, or I'm just going to call it o.exe, or image or child process is o.exe. This gives me the view of what happens when o.exe is the parent and when o.exe is the child process, and all in one view. So what we can do now is we're taking a look at, we see parent image command kicking off o.exe. We see services.exe kicking it off. And then we see o.exe kicking off itself. So we're getting a little more information. Now this kind of makes sense because if it is a service, then services.exe is responsible for executing it. And if we take a look at the command line arguments, we actually see different arguments being thrown, which is interesting. So we see this one's QKY, this one's QFO. Now, I don't know if they always start with a Q, but that could be something to pivot on as well. But like I said, we're going to focus on process IDs. So if we take a look at the process IDs and the parent process IDs, and all I did was I took the process ID field, I renamed it PID or PID, and then I took the parent process ID field and named it PPID. Parent process ID, process ID. So if we come down here, the idea that we want to follow is, okay, so the parent process ID matches the parent image. The process ID matches the child process. From here, I want to find out what happened next. And the easiest way to do that is to take these process IDs and promote them to the parent process ID. And that looks like a simple query like this. All right, so all we did was we have the same sysmon index, computer name, and event code 1, and we took the process IDs and put them in the parent process ID field. Now we're using the in operator. What that does in Splunk is it allows you to throw in a list of values between parentheses instead of typing out parent process ID equals 9288 or parent process ID 900 or parent process ID 3940, which makes it look a lot neater. And all these commas are basically logical ORs, if you can picture that. So what we did is we took that child process or the child process ID, and then we promoted to a parent process ID to see if it spawned any children. So what we have here is we have the 9288 parent process ID now, and we see that it is command.exe kicking off o.exe again. Then we can take the 900 and we see that it's services.exe, and we see a lot of stuff happening simply because services.exe does a lot of things on our Windows machine. It's not just for malicious or malware, really. So it's handling a lot of things. But if we scroll all the way down, we can see that it's o.exe kicking off o.exe again. So it doesn't give us a lot of information. So where do we go from here? Well, we're going to do the same thing that we just did, and we're going to focus on two process IDs. Now it's going to be 1572, which is here, and then the process ID of this event. I don't want to try and sit here and figure out which process ID belongs to what, and honestly, I'm not really worried about services.exe right now, but I want to see what these process IDs or what events are related to these process IDs once they become the parent. Still event code 1, so we're still looking at process creates. And as we move down, we see that 4740 has a hit. So we know that that execution chain has continued. It looks like that it is now executing or spawning command.exe. Now, one thing I will say about this child process that is concerning right away is the syswow64 directory. So what that means, and I guess this is a little Microsoft history for you, on a 64-bit machine, a system32 directory is where all the native living off land binaries live, and they will be the ones that are normally used. Now, because a 64-bit machine is backwards compatible, it has to have the functionality and it has to have 32-bit processes or other living off the land binaries on it. So that's where the syswow64 directory comes in. Within the syswow64 directory lies all the 32-bit living off land binaries and DLLs and stuff needed that just come with the operating system. Why are the numbers backwards? I don't know. But the best thing you can think of is syswow64 is, wow, this was a 32-bit living off land binary used on a 64-bit machine, and then just remember system32 is the normal. On a 32-bit machine, you only have system32. Which is a 1-to-1, so that makes sense. History lesson over. We're going to continue this investigation, and I apologize for that. But now we see that whatever this process was, it's now kicking off syswow64, or a command from syswow64. And we also have some more process IDs. So what are we going to do about that? Same thing we've been doing. We're just going to keep working through that chain. We're going to take these process IDs and promote them. And we're going to see what we returned. All right, so now we have some activity that's happening that appears to be what I would call, or what other people call, discovery type activity. We see some living off the land binaries being used that repeatedly just gather information about your machine. So netstat, ipconfig, net, reg, who am I? All these tools are used or can be used to figure out what the configurations are in your environment. Now, why would that be useful for an adversary? Well, as an adversary, once they do get into your environment or your network and they've compromised the machine, normally they do external reconnaissance, then they pick out who they're going to target. And once they're in, they got to do internal reconnaissance to figure out where they are. Because remember, they're not just walking in your environment and sitting down, pulling up a desk and saying, I'm here, I'm going to attack you. No, they have to figure out where they're at, just like honestly any new employee will have to in their environment. But from here, where can we go? I want to see, and personally, I want to use the event code trick again. But this time, I'm going to look for event codes that are related to these living off land binaries. So we run that, see what happens, and we got 0 results. Where I left out some asterisks. Did that work? Computer index sysmon, parent nhn. So we have 2 hits. All right, what ran? So we're gonna figure this out. So we see the parent image is syswow64net.exe, and it kicked off net1.exe. So out of all those, and we can actually just grab this field because we know what's going on now. So what I'm doing is, once we moved on to that event code search, we're now adding in the values. But now we know out of all these executables, only 2 had follow-on activity, and those were net. And so we see net users spawned net1.exe, which is a common relationship. All right, so we followed our process chain down the road. We used process IDs. And then one thing that I didn't show that we could always do is if we take the same process IDs here, and we're going to start here, but if you want to see anything else that happened, and this is a common technique I use because I like to figure out how things are related, we can use the parent process ID, and we're going to add a parentheses here and say or process ID in, and we're just going to copy this. So by adding the or process ID in, what we're doing is we are expanding our search again to say I'm looking for parent process IDs equal one of these, or process ID equals one of these, and I remove the event code 1 because I want to see what else happened, or if there's anything else that's related to these events or these process IDs that we missed, because we were just following down the event code. We were doing event code 1, and here we go. We have a 3. So what is the 3? That is the sysmon event code for network connections. So we want to figure out where is that event? What does it do? And here we go. We have the o.exe that is reaching out or making an internet or network connection to the destination IP is 10.10.30.98 over destination port 9000. The user is the system, so that's kind of scary. Why is the system doing this? And we can come down here and figure out where our source IP is. So now that we've figured out that we have a network connection, we can come here to the events that we've identified already, and we can see that there are some fields that we could use. So if we scroll up again and we want to include those, we can say values, destination IP, and I kind of cheated because I've used this before, but destination port as destination port, values, source IP as source IP by image, and now we're going to see the results that we get. And we see that it's 10.10.30.98, destination port 9000, and source IP. So once again, just another trick to expand your search, find other events that are related to different things. And then in this case, we used process IDs and parent process IDs. But by expanding that search and not just focusing on process create events, we were able to find a network connection now. So now we know that not only is this thing a service or the interpreter default service name, but what we can figure out is, oh, it's also a backdoor that seems to be reaching out to 9000 or over port 9000. So these are the facts and these are the artifacts that you can present to the incident response team as needed, or whoever, or if you're the incident responder, now you know to shut down destination port or port 9000, and you have all these other artifacts that you can pivot off of along the way when you are actually mitigating the threat. Well, thank you again for tuning in for another episode of our 30-minute hunts. I hope you enjoy this, and I hope it's helped you improve your threat hunting skills. I hope you stay tuned for more. And as always, happy hunting.